Let's remember now that we're fully back in person, we stick with one question, one follow-up. Une question, une supplémentaire, s'il vous plaît. We should have until about 1 p.m. for this press conference, including some opening and closing remarks. If we have time after questions in the room, we may take questions over Zoom. With that housekeeping done, let's begin with opening remarks. Mr. Johnston, à vous la parole.
Well, hello, everyone. Bon après-midi. I wish to begin by acknowledging that the land on which we gather is the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. It's a pleasure for me to be with you here this afternoon. I'm joined today by my counsel, Sheila Block, who will be able to assist with any technical points and questions. Our democracy is built on trust. Trust in our institutions, our governments, and our fellow Canadians. Unfortunately, recent allegations of foreign interference have threatened that trust, raising legitimate questions and also undermining our confidence in our government's ability or willingness to protect our democracy. Canadians deserve forthright answers about the impact of foreign interference and whether the government has failed to act appropriately. To be able to make any improvements to the systems that protect our democracy, we must first answer who knew what, when they knew it, and crucially, what was done regarding these recent allegations. This is the focus of my first report. Au cours des 2 derniers mois, j'ai examiné tous les faits et documents pertinents relatifs à ces allégations. Il s'agit notamment des dossiers des services de renseignement originaux. J'ai également interrogé les plus hauts fonctionnaires des agences de renseignement et les ministres responsables. I have had an unprecedented level of access. I have worked with the security agencies to disclose to Canadians as much as I responsibly and possibly can in my report, more than has been done before. Based on my review, I have reached 5 clear conclusions. First, foreign governments are undoubtedly attempting to influence candidates and voters in Canada. Foreign interference is a real and growing threat, and more remains to be done promptly to strengthen our capacity to detect, deter, and counter foreign interference in elections. Second, when viewed in full context with all of the relevant intelligence, several leaked materials that raised legitimate questions turn out to have been misconstrued in some media reporting, presumably because of the lack of this context. Third, I have identified serious shortcomings in the way intelligence is communicated and processed from security agencies through to government. Fourth, a further public process is required, but there should not and need not be a separate formal public inquiry. The public inquiry examining the leaked materials could not be undertaken in public, given the sensitivity of the intelligence. However, public hearings on the serious governance and policy issues identified to date should and will be held at the earliest possible date as part of the second phase of my mandate. Finally, I recognize this report's conclusions would be met with skepticism by some, especially by those who in good faith have worked to raise legitimate questions around these issues. The challenge is this: what has allowed me to determine whether there has in fact been interference cannot be disclosed publicly. A public review of classified intelligence simply cannot be done. Therefore, fifth, I recommend the Prime Minister invite the 2 oversight committees on national security, NSICOP and INSIRA, to review my conclusions and provide them with all supporting materials including an annex which contains the classified information. If they disagree with my conclusions, they should say that. Le défi est le suivant. Ce qui m'a permis de déterminer s'il y a effectivement eu interférence ne peut être divulgué en public. L'examen public de renseignements classifiés est tout simplement impossible. Pour cette raison, et cinquièmement, je demande au Premier ministre d'inviter les deux comités de surveillance de la sécurité nationale d'examiner mes conclusions et tous les documents à l'appui, y compris l'annexe classifiée. S'ils ne sont pas d'accord avec mes conclusions, ils devraient faire une déclaration publique à cet effet. In addition to the parliamentarians who are already members of NSICOP, I encourage the Prime Minister to invite the leaders of the three major opposition parties to join that process personally so they can assess for themselves the intelligence in my conclusions. This is a necessary step in transparency and accountability to provide Canadians confidence in my conclusions. My review has shown that common techniques of foreign interference include cyber attacks, online influence campaigns, disinformation, and the exploitation of human relationships. Fortunately, measures put in place by our governments have been largely successful. The elections of 2019 and 2021 were well protected by sophisticated mechanisms, and there is no basis to lack confidence in those results. Les élections de 2019 et 2021 ont été bien protégées par des mécanismes sophistiques. Il n'y a aucune raison de manquer de confiance dans ces résultats. En même temps, le Canada doit demeurer vigilant face à cette menace et travailler d'urgence pour renforcer sa capacité de détecter, de dissuader et de contrer cette menace à notre démocratie. The recent allegations of foreign interference in media reports have amplified public concern around these issues and are a central component of my first report. They raise legitimate questions which deserve complete answers. Much of what has been reported has been based on limited and partial intelligence. That reporting has been made without the benefit of the full context provided by all relevant materials. Experienced, intelligent professionals understand that individual pieces of intelligence must be viewed with considerable skepticism. It is extremely rare to draw conclusions, much less take action from a single intelligence report. Each piece of intelligence is a brushstroke to paint a broader picture. Only upon seeing the full picture, with the benefit of all relevant intelligence, can one conclude that much of the reported intelligence has been misconstrued in media reports, presumably because of this lack of context in these instances. In some cases, the materials I reviewed tell a very different story than what has been reported to date. Foreign interference is not usually embodied in discrete, one-off pieces of intelligence. It cannot be dealt with on a one-off look-I-found basis. The limited leaked intelligence and subsequent reporting have led to misapprehensions relating to incidents that are alleged to have occurred in the 2019 and 2021 elections. Moreover, I have found no examples of ministers, the Prime Minister, or their offices knowingly or negligently failing to act on intelligence, advice, or recommendations on the issues I have investigated related to the 2019 and 2021 elections. However, I did find that there are significant and unacceptable gaps in the machinery of government. Les renseignements sont décentralisés et dans de nombreux cas mal communiqués. Ils ne sont pas correctement filtrés vers les principaux décideurs et les mécanismes de responsabilité en place ne sont pas suffisants. Il ne s'agit pas seulement de problèmes au niveau politique. Le flux d'informations entre les agences de sécurité et les ministères qu'elles seules n'est pas non plus bien suivi. Il s'agit là d'obstacles sérieux à la gestion efficace des informations et des examens. Another central piece of my mandate and a requirement of this first report was to determine if a separate public inquiry or public process is required to investigate foreign interference in our democracy. There have been widespread calls for a public inquiry from media, opposition parties, and Parliament through a motion passed in the House of Commons. When I began this process, I thought I would come to the same conclusion, that I would recommend a public inquiry. Well, it would have been an easy choice. It would not be the correct. Une enquête publique distincte n'offrira tout simplement pas le niveau de transparence et d'urgence attendu par les Canadiens et les Canadiennes. Les renseignements que j'ai examinés sont et doivent rester secrets. Par conséquent, toute enquête publique crédible ne sera pas de tout public. A separate public inquiry will simply not deliver the level of transparency and urgency Canadians expect. The intelligence I have reviewed is and must remain secret. As a result, the reality is any credible public inquiry would not be public at all. In contrast, by conducting a thorough review of my conclusions and recommendations, our intelligence oversight committees, NSICOP and NSERA, have the opportunity and the duty to help restore Canadians' trust in our democratic institutions. That said, the public process is warranted to address the parts of my mandate that are not classified. Canadians rightly have questions and deserve to be engaged fully in my work. In the next stage of my mandate, I will conduct public hearings to hear from Canadians about the numerous policy questions my work has raised. Cela comprendra des audiences publiques pour apprendre des membres de la communauté de la diaspora et des experts en sécurité nationale et en relations internationales. Au cours de ce processus, les Canadiens auront également l'occasion d'entendre directement les hauts représentants de la sécurité nationale en public. The second phase of my work, I intend to tackle a number of critical issues. This includes concerns of diaspora communities and individuals about foreign interference. I will investigate the challenge of using classified intelligence in law enforcement and how it might be addressed. I will review the role and structure of NSICOP and whether it can be strengthened. I will suggest amendments to the CHCH Act that might assist in fighting foreign interference. I will investigate various issues with the machinery of government, including processes for funneling intelligence to top officials, more effective tracking protocols, and clearer lines of responsibility. I will also review the merits of a government-led process for declassification of information to enhance transparency and look at the case for a National Security Committee of Cabinet. I will examine the issue of how the government deals with threats against elected officials. Canadians need to understand the threat this issue presents and the mechanisms needed to address it. Je voudrais conclure en remerciant mon équipe qui a travaillé sans relâche au cours de ces 2 derniers mois pour examiner des montagnes de preuves et de renseignements tout en menant un large éventail d'entretiens. We will continue this work to complete my mandate by October of this year, with a particular focus on providing recommendations to address the serious gaps identified in this report and improve Canada's capacity to detect, deter, and combat foreign interference. Thank you all for your time and attention this afternoon, and I would be happy to take your questions.
Thank you, merci. We'll start with Campbell Clark, Globe and Mail, and ensuite Anne-Caroline Desplanques, Journal de Montréal.
Good afternoon, Mr. Johnston. You've recommended a process going forward, a review of your findings by two bodies and hearings that you would hold on the process, the things you found about miscommunication of intelligence, mishandling of intelligence. You've heard the criticism from the opposition and others about your appointment, about your role based on your relationship with Mr. Trudeau's family. So why are you the person to lead those hearings going forward rather than a judge, an independent judge who could hold hearings in camera or in public?
Well, let me respond by stating basic facts. First of all, my friendship with the current Prime Minister. When our children, 5, were ages 7 to 12, we had a condo at the foot of Mont Tremblant. I knew Mr. Trudeau's father. He had a country home about 50 kilometers away in Valmorin. On, I think, 5 occasions over several years, he and his 3 sons came and parked their car at our parking lot outside our condo, and we skied. On one of those 5 occasions or so, he had to leave early to get back to Montreal, and on that occasion, I drove the 3 sons over to their mother's home, country home, which was about 10 kilometers present. Those are the so-called neighborhoods. My friendship with the current Prime Minister was based only on a few skiing expeditions with my children. He was a student at McGill where I was principal, and amongst about 20,000 students, I would see him from time to time. In that period of time, until he became a Liberal member of Parliament, and I was Governor General, I had no meetings with Mr. Trudeau, Mr. Justin Trudeau. I had no letters that I can recall, no telephone calls. The only occasion I recall meeting him in that period of 40 years was at the funeral of his father, which my wife attended. So there was no interaction with respect to the current Prime Minister of a friendly kind, other than the respect I have for a graduate of McGill University. And my only real contact occurred, he became an elected member of Parliament, and I was Governor General. Those are the facts, so-called friendship and scheme. With respect to my connection to the Trudeau Foundation, I've been a general manager of universities for 27 years, very interested in any scholarship program. The Trudeau Foundation one was very important because it provided scholarships for graduate students in the humanities and social sciences. My contact with the Trudeau Foundation was this. In about a year after I finished being Governor General, late in 2018, I was invited to become a member of the association of the foundation, which is like shareholders in a company, which meet once a year with the responsibilities to receive an annual report, to approve the financial statements, to appoint auditors, and to elect the board of directors. My contact was simply that. I think I attended 4 of the annual general meetings, perhaps 5 by Zoom. The one which took place in Ottawa, I think I was there for about an hour and a half, and I had other appointments. I did make donations, as I think the other members of that association, not the board of directors, not involved in decision making. The alleged the gift that is under controversy was 2014, 2015, and 2018. I think over the course of 4 or 5 years, donations were of the order of $300 or $400 a year, which would be less than 1% of the donations my wife and I make regularly to a number of scholarship funds that we support across the country. The third fact is this. I've been fortunate in my public life to have served as chair of or member of advisory committee or task forces, on probably 2 to 3 dozen different occasions over years, with appointments by prime ministers, several premiers, several ministers. And on none of those previous occasions, my impartiality or integrity ever been questioned. This is the first time it has happened. But let me simply say that's very troubling for me because this kind of baseless set of accusations diminishes trust in our public institutions and deters people who are publicly minded, who are quite prepared to take on public service responsibility, task forces, and so on. There's a chill on that, and that's very troubling.
You addressed the question of whether the criticisms about whether you're in conflict, but not the question about whether a judge could do a better job here, sworn in, hearing testimony in private or in public, sorry. And also you have recommended review by two bodies, NCICOP and NSERA, that opposition critics have already rejected as sort of under the control of government because their reports and their access to information is vetted by the government.
Well, with respect to who might lead public inquiry, that person or persons would have the same fundamental program that we and our team have had. That one cannot deal with these allegations with respect to negligence or managing things to provide partisan advantage without full consideration of all of the information, including classified information. And that can't be made public. So I don't know whether another person would have any greater ability. With respect to experience, I'm a lawyer, a professor of law for some 45, 55 years, and I've had some responsibility for making judgments of different kinds, and one will have to stand on that. Just give me the second part of your question again. Yeah, and it's important spending some time on those bodies. NCICOP was created in 2017 as a response to this growing foreign influence. And it's made up of 4 parliamentarians from the governing party, 2 from the opposition party, the Conservatives, 1 from the Democratic Party, and 1 from the Bloc Québécois, and 1 independent senator. And they have been at work with their staff since 2017, and their job is to review, among other things, foreign influence in our elections and our other democratic processes and protect them. They report to the Prime Minister, the report goes to Parliament, and that is the body that has the important oversight function with respect to how we manage this danger of foreign influence. That body has been charged with the Prime Minister to review the same terms of reference mandate that I have. And I have invited that body to take my report along with the confidential annex and to review it with great care. Also suggested that they work closely with NSERA, which I'll comment in a moment, and that the leaders of the 3 major opposition parties be invited to take top secret clearance and join in viewing that material and coming to whatever conclusions they want to. That's Parliament functioning as it should be, with an oversight role. That's where it belongs, not with a retired judge and not with a professor of law of some years. That's where Parliament has to function. NSERA, the National Security Independent Review Agency, is an executive agency with experts on foreign intelligence and other things. It's appointed on the recommendation of the Prime Minister in consultation with the leaders of the opposition parties and the leaders in the Senate. So that's a collaborative appointment. Its job is to review the activities of all the agents of securities and intelligence. Any particular matter that deals with things like foreign, that body too is an oversight body. That's the kind of body that should be functioning to oversee. Chaired by a former judge, especially. Thank you. Chaired by a former judge, a dean of law professor, a former national security investment advisor, an intelligence advisor, and an entrepreneur makeup committee. That was created in 2019. Both of those committees provide their reports to Parliament, and both of those committees have a fundamental responsibility and oversight role. It's very precious. That's the kind of oversight that we should be using, I think, to deal with these.
Anne-Caroline Desplanques, tu veux la demander? Non?
Raphaël Perrault, agence QMI, collègue d'Anne-Caroline. Je voulais juste commencer par résumer, si vous pouvez résumer là, la première question. Donc, revenir un peu sur vos liens avec M. Trudeau et pourquoi est-ce que vous êtes la bonne personne pour mener à terme cette enquête?
Je m'excuse. Répétez la question, s'il vous plaît.
Je vais juste répéter en français, en fait, peut-être résumer les liens avec M. Trudeau et pourquoi est-ce qu'il vous a choisi, pourquoi vous êtes la bonne personne pour mener à terme cette enquête.
Oui, seulement la question des connexions avec M. Trudeau.
C'est ça, et pourquoi vous êtes la bonne personne. Juste,
Oui, de façon très simple. Quand il était jeune homme de peut-être 12 ans, avec ses deux frères, et nous avons 5 filles du même âge. Nous avons un condo à le Mont-Tremblant pour le ski pour la fin de semaine. J'ai connu son père. Son père a une maison du pays, à Valmoran, 50 km de Mont-Tremblant, où nous avons le condo jusqu'à la base de la montagne. Et c'est 100 mètres des pistes. Monsieur Trudeau Senior a stationné son voiture pour le jour de ski avec nous, peut-être 5 fois pendant 2-3 ans. C'était le contact avec Monsieur Trudeau Jr., Premier ministre. Après ça, il était un étudiant à McGill où j'étais principal. J'ai rencontré des étudiants comme les autres, même les étudiants, mais pas avec une connexion personnelle. Et depuis cette période à McGill, je n'ai pas une réunion, un échange de lettres, un appel de téléphone, contact avec le Premier ministre courant, sauf le funérail de son père. Autre contact, quand il est élu comme membre du Parti libéral, et après ça, le Premier ministre, j'ai un contact comme gouverneur général, mais c'était très important. Le point est, pendant 40 ans, je n'ai pas un contact direct avec M. Trudeau. Pas comme un ami.
merci. Ma deuxième question. La seule personne, et je vais, also going to ask you to answer in English. La seule personne dans tout le rapport pour l'instant à qui vous attribuez un peu de malice, c'est le fuiteur. Donc, il y a quelqu'un au service de renseignement qui fait des fuites et donc cette personne devrait, avec toute l'énergie nécessaire, être identifiée, possiblement poursuivie. Pourtant, c'est probablement à cause de ces fuites qu'on est ici en ce moment en train de faire une enquête sur l'ingérence étrangère qui, selon vous, est nécessaire. Donc, il faudrait effectivement qu'on enquête là-dessus. C'est un sujet sérieux. Donc, sans cette personne, on ne serait peut-être pas ici. Est-ce que vous trouvez que le fuiteur en question, d'une certaine façon, contribue à au succès, ou je dirais à la défense des intérêts nationaux du Canada? And could you please also answer in English? Thank you.
If I understand your question properly, si vous comprenez votre question, est-ce possible pour une seule personne de faire l'évaluation? Absolument non. C'est la raison que j'ai une équipe oui.
This, in your report, is the leaker from the CSIS and or leakers maybe. And so, you know, in a way, it's because of these leaks, though, that we're here and we're investigating on this issue, which is an important issue, as you identified. So, in a way, is that leaker not contributing to our national interest in a way? And did he do something right in a certain sense, even if he broke the law? Because if it wasn't for leaks, we probably wouldn't be here.
Well, I want to be very clear in that answer. Um, uh, Certainly, the attention that media have given to interference in our foreign election is important and is very useful at this time because it's a very substantial danger. It's growing and it needs to be combated. With respect to the leaks, what I must say is that is something that challenges the entire trust in our system, intelligence gathering, communicating it, moving it through the channels. If I'm the ordinary person sitting at home listening to this, and I consider that someone's, presume I'm very well educated, join the intelligence service of Canada, take an oath to maintain secrecy. They are under obligation of the Security and Information Act, not divulge, learn. And when they choose to break that oath, that is wrong. It's very damaging. Undermines a system built on trust, this information. It puts lives at danger, and it breaches our compact of trust with our five allies who are engaged in the same business. And in fact, allies around. So to my mind, that is most unfortunate. And it is a situation that jeopardizes how we go about our intelligence. And I can't speculate on motives, who or what.
David Aiken Gold.
David Aiken Global. Good afternoon. One of your conclusions suggests that there were no the prime minister, you could find no evidence that they failed to act. But as I read your report, you're really referring to the 6, 8 instances of leaks. And in fact, the case, I'll put it to you, could be made that the prime minister, key ministers, senior leadership did fail to act to address the systemic failings in information management that you address, going back to multiple NSICOP reports, Judd reports, that was a failure by the political class, not the bureaucrats, not the system. They failed to manage the information better.
Let me say two things in response to your question. Number one, in looking at failures of appropriate action on foreign interference, we were tasked with the job of determining whether there was any negligence or conscious avoiding of dealing with those issues for some political reason. And we went through 9 different cases, the most perhaps prominent ones that those reported. And we did not find any evidence of that kind of negligence or acting in a partisan way. What we did find, your second point, is that we have a system that's not working effectively, not working as it should. And I don't think there's any surprise in that, as we've seen foreign influence growing quite dramatically with the focus on Russia in 2016, and look at what's happened in the United States with that. And then towards 2018, especially with the case of the 2 Michaels and so on, it became more Chinese influence. The two are very different. Russian is much more focused on destroying democratic institutions. Chinese interference is much more long-term, much more pervasive, and much more sophisticated in using disinformation and things to protect what China regards as its special areas of protection, so-called five poisons. And we have not responded quickly, effectively, as we should, especially to this accelerating rise in digital information and so on, and our human ability to interact at that level. So there's a gap in that. But we're no strangers to that. All of the Western democracies are. We have much to learn from one another, and we have much to do to address those failings in the machinery of government, which are very real. And in the second part of our report, the next 5 months we'll work very earnestly with the different agencies and in public hearings to address that and to try to be as constructive as we possibly can and to engage the other agencies that are engaged in the same thing and to make it very open.
Thanks. And I want to come back to this issue that my friends have raised about your resume, and I take note of your impassioned defense of your own ability to be impartial and the long career of being impartial. But as you know, with a lot of conflict of interest type situations, it's the appearance. It's the appearance of being beyond reproach. And so thinking about that, not the actual facts of the matter, were you the right person to have been selected to do this? And are you certain you're the right person to now lead the public process, that there's no one else in the country who might be more beyond reproach and have maybe a very similar background and experience that you have?
You know, I can't cast judgment on that, on my competence or relative competence with others. And yes, of course, there are I think lots of people you or I could identify who would be very capable of doing a comprehensive review. What I can say with respect to the allegations of an appearance of conflict of interest, I took the trouble of seeking a legal opinion from a retired Supreme Court Justice, Justice Frank Antonucci. It's very clear that there's no conflict of interest with respect to the Trudeau allegation. So I have no doubt whatsoever that I had any conflict of interest. No doubt at all myself about my impartiality or my ability to bring my record such as it is for you to judge as to whether I'm capable of carrying out a impartial and inquiry based on integrity.
Emily Bergeron.
Vous avez conclu qu'il n'y a pas eu d'ignorance intentionnelle de la part de M. Trudeau ni de ministre. Do you want me to say it in English? Okay. You concluded that there was no intentional ignorance or resulting to inaction from the Prime Minister, from ministers, and it was more like communication problems. But if so, how do you explain that many sources anonymously turned to two media to say to leak information? And there was also an open-ed in the Globe and Mail where the source said why she did that, and she said there was indeed inaction and ignorance of many alert signs. Or so, what can explain so multiple sources turn to media if there was no inaction or ignorance, intentional or not?
Well, c'est une bonne question. It's an important question. The leaks are based on partial information, in some case documents, that don't tell a full story. What I've tried to emphasize in the area of intelligence, one is dealing with different pieces of information. We use the analogy of painting a picture, the number of different brushstrokes. You must have most of all of them together before you get a picture. Or a jigsaw puzzle as you're putting pieces in place until you find it. So those leaks were based on partial information. And in our investigation, in our review of 9 different instances, based on open information, more particularly classified information, we came to the conclusion that there was not negligence on the part of any of the ministers, nor malfeasance in the sense of attempting to twist this what is invented. But there was a system that is not functioning effectively. How we manage that intelligence, how it crystallizes into something that begins to be, this is difficult, and then into some recommendation. Our system is not producing that. And in defense, we're not alone in having that kind of difficulty, but we have much to do to be much more effective, much more professional, much more harmonized. And that's where we hope to spend a good deal of time, including public hearings in the second part of the
Sorry. So this is not my follow-up, but just to clarify, these sources, they are regular consumers of little pieces of information, and you say, so they can see the bigger picture. So in that context, my question was more why these people, knowing the bigger picture, or how things work within, and how these small pieces should be interpreted in the bigger picture, why would they still go to media? But my follow-up was more when you met with the leader of the oppositions that wanted to meet you, were your conclusions already drawn, and how did you take the inputs from them, and did you change any parts of your report? Because we saw this morning the former leader of the Conservatives saying he met with you, he thought it was unuseful and it was a loss of time, he wrote.
Thank you for that question. The first part of it was that the leaks were not based on full information and turning all the classified information. As we read those leaks and as we dealt with it, we came to the conclusion that there was a much fuller story that wasn't there. With respect to the comments of Mr. O'Toole, here are the facts. We, as we were asked to do in our mandate, contacted the leaders of the opposition parties to seek their assistance, both with materials and media. On 4 different occasions, we approached the leader of the opposition party. On 4 occasions, we did not get a response to meet with us. On one occasion, we sent a short reply that not responding to the materials we needed. And as we came to the May 23rd deadline of our report, wanting to hear from the Conservative Party, we did have the documents in which they set out allegations with respect to we considered that going back to around about May 23rd was the deadline for our report. We sought a meeting and Mr. O'Toole responded quickly for a meeting, and that was on this past Wednesday show. A very helpful, lengthy meeting. Mr. O'Toole is a man for whom I have great respect. I know well, former military man. He appeared for top secret clearance, so he's no stranger to military intelligence. And he presented with us a review of the matters covered in the media and some modeling elections. In his view, that perhaps a minimum of 4 or a maximum of 9 instances constituency results were affected. We took that material on the Wednesday. We did indicate that our report, part of our report at that time, had gone for translation, but it was not final. We considered those materials to share. We responded to them with positions in our report, and we set them out. And we found we differ in our conclusion with Mr. O'Toole's conclusion that there was tilt in those elections in 4 to 9 cases, and Elections Canada has found no interference. So that was our conclusion, which is different than Mr. O'Toole's. What he did also present was his very earnest, well thought out concern for the machinery of government and security intelligence. Provided us with a great deal of advice, and we are hearing from Mr. O'Toole in our follow-up because he has a very important contribution to make in this position on how we do a better job. So that's the story.
Could you just repeat shortly in French
Oui.
your response to Mr. O'Toole?
Brièvement, ça sera un défi pour moi. Nous avons, quand nous avons commencé notre enquête, contacté les chefs des 3 partis d'opposition, M. Singh et M. Beauvais. Josette a répondu, nous avons rencontré avec la commission. Nous avons contacté M. Poilievre 4 fois, commence la dernière semaine d'avril, et jusqu'à 3 ou 4 jours avant le fin de notre deadline pour le report. Il n'a pas répondu, et le dernier jour, il a envoyé une collection de matières que nous avons vu déjà parce que nous sommes sous ça dans notre collection des rapports de médias. À ce moment, nous avons contacté M. O'Toole pour réunion. Nous avons eu M. O'Toole le vendredi. Il m'a donné beaucoup de conseils, messages et des documents qui suggèrent qu'il y a des changements profonds entre 4 et nous avons revu ce matériel et nous avons conclu qu'il n'y a pas de preuve pour cette question. Mais notre report procès en traduction à ce moment, mais ce n'est pas final. Et nous avons reflété les arguments, les positions de M. O'Toole dans le rapport final. Finalement, M. O'Toole est un homme pour qui j'ai beaucoup de respect. Il est un veteran with the top security clearance quand il était dans la force armée. Et il a beaucoup de contribué dans la deuxième portion de notre mandat d'augmenter et perfectionner notre processus de machinerie de gouvernement pour le public.
Question here on my right from CTV and back over here.
Hi, Rachel Aiello at CTV News. So you've made clear that there are limitations in what a public process would accomplish. So can you explain how a public hearing is going to get Canadians closer to any answers and accountability in ways that an inquiry wouldn't? Or are you kind of moving away from the look under the hood and basically telling Canadians now, take my word for what I found there?
What we're saying is that a public inquiry into the questions of who knew what they did with at what time and what they did with it cannot be discussed in public, because to understand that fully, you must deal with classified information. So the very process is not possible to get at things that you really want to get at, that people want to get. Moreover, even if one did that in camera, that interrogation and so on, looking at classified information, you can't report it publicly because that's forbidden by the Security Information Act, and it leads to all the perils I just spoke about, of danger of people's lives, undermining of our systems, and breaching faith with our lives. What we can do in public, and we can do it, or another inquiry could do, is to take information that is in the public realm, to examine our machinery of government for handling foreign intelligence, and come to some conclusions on how we can do better. And it's very clear to me that we can do better. One only has to look at other jurisdictions around the world dealing with this very alarming and spreading system of foreign influence to know that there are ways we can improve. And we will undertake that over the course of the next 5 months. And Sakopin and Syria will do so. And I'm very anxious that Parliament performs its proper accountability and oversight function to say, we have a really serious problem here that's growing, and it deserves the careful, thoughtful attention of Parliament, most important.
And there seems to be suggestions that, there are elements of interference happening, intelligence around that, but not evidence. I'm wondering what your thoughts are based on what you've looked at so far, whether governments can do more to act. Obviously, Canadians are wanting some sort of accountability or consequences for foreign actors. So what would you suggest the government do to show that they are being proactive to address allegations of interference when they arise?
You're very correct in your question. Much more can be done. We set out in a section of our report what has been done from about 2015 on, with 7 or 8 different institutes trying to improve, trying to perfect, trying to make it better. That still falls short of where we should be. And it falls short because this foreign influence is growing. It's pernicious, pervasive. It's not easy to deal with. But we expect that in our next 5 months, in the second part of a mandate, to deal with precisely the question you raised. We can attract the best intelligence in public hearings, where there will be an opportunity to see these things, and especially learn from what other jurisdictions have done in dealing with the same problem.
Coming down to about the last 5 minutes before closing statement, I realize there are many of you online. Perhaps we could either go faster or stick to a single question. We might get more in, but I don't get into that argument themselves.
Je m'excuse pour mes réponses qui sont trop longues. Professor.
Just to follow up on Rachel's question about taking your word for it. You've said NSICOP and Sarah will obviously check your work and pass judgment on your conclusions, but obviously Canadians will still end up having to take their word for it. Is there a problem here that Canadian voters will have to take the word of other sources and not be able to see this intelligence? Is there perhaps a problem here with overclassification of information?
Well, yes, there is a problem in that one can't divulge everything that Canadians would like to know. Can we do more in being somewhat more transparent with what is classified or not? I think we can somewhat. And some other jurisdictions have handled this transition from intelligence to evidence with somewhat more nuanced rules than we have, beginning with perhaps looking at the security and information. So I think that can be done, but it can't give a complete answer to your good question. No, we cannot take all Canadians into full confidence saying, here's the classified information, come to your. With respect to whether we have the appropriate accountability mechanisms, that's Parliament. We have two bodies that were created by statute, one in 2017, one in 2019, I think growing in their ability to take on this accountability responsibility. If they're insufficient, that's Parliament's job to say, we must do better with our oversight mechanism. Who is the watchman of the watchman? And one should not be having a special interrogator or rapporteur to deal with that.
On NSICOP, because you are putting a lot of emphasis, I believe in the report you do raise some concerns with the politics and the partisanship that have surrounded this issue. NSICOP is ultimately a political body made up of politicians. Do you have faith that it can put politics aside and get at this issue?
Well, I really hope that we can diminish the partisan activity. I mean, one only has to look south of the border to see how that has paralyzed the system. We can't allow that to happen. This is a precious country. U.S. News and World Report does annual surveys of the most admired countries in the world. Canada's number one or in the top 2 or 3 places. That's blessed. That's precious. And you know, our responsibility is to make this experiment in inclusivity, which is Canada, work effectively. And that's Parliament. That's who we elect to govern us and provide appropriate system. Can we do better in this particular system? Much. We have much to learn to others, and we must be conscious that we're dealing with something that is not a passing fad. This is serious stuff, and these hostile actors have a real intention to bring down our democratic institutions. Just look what's happened over the past, 15, 20 years as we've seen the diminution of democracy, the reduction in the number of fully functioning democracies, and the success in persuading countries on the cusp that autocratic authoritarian governments are the way to deal with their problems. Democracy is challenged. Let's not say in fundamental terms, but challenged. My heavens, if any country in the world would be making democracy work, this country can. And that's what we must get about.
Justin Ling, and then I believe it might be time for a closing.
Great. You deal really briefly with the question of Han Dong's meeting at the Chinese consulate, enough to say that it's inaccurate to say that he called for the prolonged attention of the two Michaels. But here's a guy who you conclude was the beneficiary, unwittingly, of Chinese interference, meeting with a hostile foreign power, but you don't say anything more about it. Can you give us any more details? Is that something that should be declassified? And does it strike to that question of trust that we don't know why he was meeting with the Chinese consulate and not telling his government about it?
Thank you for that question. I'm going to the report. And the reason I'm going to the report is I must be careful about the two parts of my brain. One part of my brain has open information in it. The other part has classified information. Sheila, you will watch carefully. But I think we should go to the report to deal with that question. This is page 23. And forgive me, but let me read exactly because you understand the dilemma I have. PRC interfered with the nomination of Han Dong as the Liberal Party candidate in Don Valley North. Global News. Is that the issue that you're raising?
Well, yeah. I mean, we know that he met with the consulate based on the intelligence you reviewed, but we don't know why.
Here's what we say. I reviewed the intelligence relating to this allegation, interviewed various officials. I can report the following. Irregularities were observed with Mr. Dong's nomination in 2019, and there is well-grounded suspicion that the irregularities were tied to the PRC, the People's Republic of China Consulate in Toronto, with whom Mr. Dong maintains relationships. In reviewing the intelligence, I did not find evidence that Mr. Dong was aware of the irregularities or the PRC's consulate's potential involvement in his nomination. Prime Minister was briefed about these irregularities, although no specific recommendation was provided. He concluded there was no basis to displace Mr. Dong as the candidate for Don Valley North. This was not an unreasonable conclusion based on the intelligence available to the Prime Minister. So that is our open report. We've had some more detail in our confidential report about that.
Okay, so let me ask you this. The government has been quite forthcoming when there's been instances of Russian interference in this country. Based on what you just read, they were not forthcoming with the public or with the opposition parties about Chinese interference. With the benefit of hindsight now, did the government err by not telling the public more specifically what China was doing to influence our political sphere?
I don't think there was any conscious desire to suppress and to diminish this. I think it was clear that we have not acted as quickly and as thoroughly as we have as a threat that has been growing. And the Chinese one is the one that came into prominence only in the last 3 or 4 years. As Mr. Joyce of the National Security Intelligence Agency in the U.S. says that Russian interference in the U.S. came in like a hurricane about 6 years ago. Chinese interference came in like climate change, longer, persistent, very widespread, very damaging. I think it's clear that we have not come to grips with the degree of Chinese foreign influence that does exist. We have much work to do a better job. And yes, the responsibility lies with the government of the day to look at how we're dealing with this threat, and whether we're meeting it effectively. And I think, as we say, in terms of the machine of government, we have a lot to do.
Might have started a little late. I know there's supposed to be 5 minutes for closing comments. We do have, I believe, Radio Canada and Canadian Press. It would be very nice if you could take one question from each of them, but we have a deal on your time, but I would appreciate it.
Okay. One more question each. Thank you.
Yeah. Mickey here with the Canadian Press. I guess, how bad is the current arrangement regarding the flow of information of intelligence? And do you expect to recommend legislative changes?
We have serious issues to deal with. We set out in our report a fairly considerable list of the things we are looking at. I would be very surprised if we don't see quite considerable changes, not because things are awful, but because things must constantly improve. And it won't come simply from us, although we'll have some. We expect other quarters, particularly the 2 review committees, to be doing precisely that. But I commend you to the portion of our report, the page number seal, where we actually set out what has been done by way of reforms, 9 or 10 initiatives over the past 3 or 4 years, but much more to come. 54 and 55.
Can I just ask a quick follow-up? You said political parties ignored facts in favor of slogans. Does that include the Liberal Party as well?
Say that again?
You mentioned in the report political parties ignored facts in favor of slogans. Does that include the Liberal Party as well? Can you give some examples?
In favor of slogans?
Facts in favor of slogans, yes.
I don't know what that expression means, facts in favor of slogans.
It was in the report. It said political parties had ignored facts regarding, intelligence and foreign interference, and they basically politicizing the issue.
Well,
Did the Liberal government do this as well?
I'm concerned about politicizing the issue, but I'm saying to be able to make accusations and so on, must have the full panoply of information. In a number of instances, that full panoply was not there.
Bonjour, Monsieur Johnson. Christian Noël de Radio-Canada. Does CSIS need to be more transparent on foreign interference like Australia information services are?
The short answer is, I think, yes. That said, we recognize fully the difficulty that CSIS has in dealing with this business of keeping information classified, but at the same time importing Canadians. It's been heartening to see that, particularly over the past 2 or 3 years, with respect to the reports that have been made, they're much more fulsome. The efforts to have public information systems are increasing. And in fact, the brief to parliamentarians, I think there were 49 in the recent year, on what are the threats to. The Canadian Securities Establishment has also worked very hard trying to acquaint Canadians. But the heart of your question, the point très central, généralement, le public ne comprend pas cette menace. Ce n'est pas dans notre report. Alors, nous avons beaucoup de travail à faire, particulièrement avec la communication publique.
Et si vous me permettez une dernière question, pas d'enquête publique parce que ce serait trop compliqué à cause des renseignements, etc. Mais là, vous allez avoir des consultations publiques. En quoi est-ce que ça va être utile? Dans quoi est-ce que ça sera davantage qu'un exercice de relations publiques?
La première question, c'est l'impact de who knew what when. Pour répondre clairement à cette question, on doit utiliser l'information classifiée. C'est impossible de faire cette information. Pour considérer notre système de gouvernement et l'argumentation, c'est possible de faire ça en public, avec la transparence. Et ce sera la mission de notre enquête pour la deuxième portion de notre. Alors? No, I hope not. I hope j'espère que ce sera un exercice de considérer les problèmes et de recommander les solutions avec les meilleurs experts que nous avons dans notre pays. Et nous avons beaucoup d'experts. Merci.
Thank you.
Merci tout le monde. Merci pour votre attention et pour votre patience. Malheureusement, je suis professeur et je parle trop long.
I understand. Did you have any closing comments? Or
I think I've had everything I need
at
to
all.
say. Sheila, is there anything that I should do or something?
Have to say the professionalism that we encountered with all the people who helped Mr. Johnston in his work was excellent. We are blessed with a public service that is very top notch.
Tout le monde.